Hey Alan,
Hey, G.
good to see you.
You too.
Yeah, been kind of really looking forward to this one. I was thinking that every time when we discuss the topic prior, I think that topic really resonates with us individually. Well, for different reasons, but I think like what couple of months ago when I read that what is it now 70% of deaths in the world, according to World Health Organization, are now because of non-communicable diseases, or in other words, chronic diseases. That really raised my sort of interest, and it made me think, right? Because previously in 150 years ago, it was mostly infectious diseases. And then the whole Western medicine, at least, to be more precise, has shifted to, treating or targeting one existing issue, right? So this is the infection. We had no come off with antibiotic or some sort of medication, and we treat it. However, more and more, and I guess that comes down to my own experience, I've noticed that the issues that we can have, they could be much more complex, and they could be involving many parts of your body, and it's not only physical, it also can be psychomatic, for example. And that also comes down to my probably experience while I was growing up, and maybe my family, that trusting doctors was always kind of a blind experience, but in a way that I wouldn't really reflect and think, how do I really feel? If something hurts, I go to the doctor, ask what's up, give me medicine, treat me. um, but I did have a fair share of experience recently where I've realized that doctors cannot help me in the way that I need help. And I guess this whole topic is about that, right? About the responsibility for your own health. And yeah, I think it's that there's definitely a lot to discuss. And
Yeah. It's a super interesting one for me as well, because of course this has been like part of my journey, and it also speaks to the different crises we had. COVID being one, where we were like, okay, but where we saw kind of the flaws of the healthcare system and the flaws of physicians also following certain directives, and then even like not agreeing within the physicians communities on the approach to take, for example, to battle COVID, the trust in our government, and then the links with the pharma industry. So this kind of environment really gave us a lot to think about, a lot to ponder. And also there is something to be said about the benefits of social media in this case, because a lot of influencers also stood up and said like, hey, this is not okay, something is
mm,
wrong here. And I think that's also, and when social media does good things, we also have to underline it, I think. And it was one of the positive effects also of certain influences on social media, to take better care of our health, and to be the master of our own health.
yeah, no, I agree. And look, I think we're not advocates saying that whole Western medicine is wrong or you shouldn't go to the doctor. I think it all comes down to what kind of issue you have. If I break my arm, I'm gonna be going to a traumatologist, right? And I think it makes absolute sense. But I think looking at the broader spectrum, and indeed, I think COVID is probably a topic by itself, because there's a lot of, I personally had a lot of consequences, health consequences after I got COVID, and it wasn't so black and white. And that's where I really started challenging and probably learning much more about medicine, about health, about, I don't know, stress, about autoimmune responses, because simply doctors weren't really able to tell me what the issue is. And I think what's really important to understand, that a lot of times, if we didn't go for a prophylactic check, we do some blood tests, it doesn't necessarily gonna show you that you have an existing issue, right? Because a lot of issues, I know, for example, insulin resistance, right, starts before you get diabetes, or inflammation that leads to autoimmune diseases, maybe many years later. So I think it all comes down to, the purpose and the responsibility that we have for our own health, to be a little bit more introspective, to really reflect and see what's happening. If something shifts, if something is different, it doesn't necessarily mean that your doctor or even your lab tests are going to tell you the answer.
Yeah, and it speaks to also the way we kind of in the West have fragmented healthcare a lot, and fragmented in many ways. So fragmented because we cannot see, or physicians cannot not really see the globality anymore. We are used to going deep into the blood test, the biomarkers, the minuscule kind of things, and going to look at very symptomatically what's happening with you and trying to fix the symptoms. So that's how the way kind of Western medicines looks at it. And we've kind of lost like the holistic approach because, like you said, one thing can affect another. The mental can affect the physical can affect the mental. And in today's approach of Western medicine, you don't really have that. It's not entirely their fault, because in terms of training, a lot of things are missing in their training. You and me are very interested in, for example, supplementation, vitamins, minerals, etc. It's something that's not really taught in med school, in most med school. So it's not, the physician is not really the person you can go to for like, hey, what can I really do to optimize my health through better food, supplements, lifestyle, things like that. This is not a conversation. You're not going to your GP to have those kind of conversations, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a deeper probably meaning here, because it all comes down also to monetary side of things, right? I mean, if you have to allocate a lot of funds, for example, to preventative care, you don't really have a tangible outcome. It's difficult to measure, right? I mean, if you're gonna change someone's lifestyle or their, I don't know, nutrition, you're not gonna have a tangible outcome and say, well, that's it. The person is not getting sick, because the whole healthcare system, at least in the Western side of the world, is still very much based on what? On medication, on direct treatments, and I mean, I don't want to sound cynical. I don't mean it in that way, but that's where the business is, right? And it's very difficult to invest a lot of money in preventative care. And I'll maybe elaborate a bit. I came across this video on YouTube also a month ago. There's this guy, and his channel's called, it's very funny. I think it's called Doobie and Gooby. Anyways, he was a neurosurgeon. So he was performing spine and brain surgeries for 15, 20 years, I think somewhere in the US or Canada. And he was a very well-respected specialist. He was very good. And in this video that he uploaded on YouTube, the title was basically, I was a neurosurgeon, but now I quit. I don't have a job, and I'm somewhere in the middle of mountains. And sort of the bottom line of that is that he was really he started tracking his patients. So he would perform, for example, spinal surgeries on some patients, and he would say some of these people relapse. Half a year later, they have, again, the exact same pain. Some people, on the other hand, he said, even after we had, for example, a scheduled surgery, half a year in advance, that wouldn't be, and then a few months later, they would tell me it's not necessary, they feel much better. So he said, I started really tracking what is it really that is affecting these people. And he started looking more into their nutrition, into their lifestyle habits, into their sleep patterns, the stress environment. And he said, I came to a conclusion that this whole medical system doesn't make sense. He said, even when I took oath, right, as a doctor to alleviate the pain and then help the others, I feel like that's not, because we're not really solving the root cause. Me performing a surgery, that is only going to make a temporary improvement if the person is not going to change their lifestyle habits. And he specifically elaborates about even the foods that people eat and the rest and stress being a massive factor. And said if people are going to be sedentary and they're not going to make a change, their spine is going to degrade in the same way. And on the other hand, people that really put effort into getting better, even though it doesn't seem like nutrition or not breath exercise, nutrition, good sleep, and reduced stress has a direct correlation with your spine, but it strongly does. And that's why he quit, because he felt like morally it wasn't the right thing to do anymore, because he wasn't solving the problem. He was almost, if you have a roof that is leaking, you would only dry the floor and then the room looks kind of clean, but the roof is still not fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. That speaks a lot to the fact that we have lost a bit the main goal of like healthcare, because we call it healthcare, but what we do in fact is like sick care, right? It's not healthcare. It's not really taking care of our health; it's taking care of us when we are sick. So that's a big difference. That's also why I started being interested in like holistic medicines, naturopathy, and TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, which I studied, because these systems were like not only working on prevention, so looking at patterns before the disease symptoms even appear, but also looking at the correlation between the mind, the body, the different organs, looking at also your environment and taking just everything into account. So kind of having this approach was super interesting to me. And it's also because we are going to talk about a lot about, okay, self-assessment and how you assess your own health and how you can optimize it. But of course, we also need to tackle the motivation part. Not everybody is as motivated or as aware of what they can do about their health. So there is also this personal responsibility you have to take care of your own health. But as your example said about like sedentary lifestyle, smoking, or other habits that are detrimental to your health, what can you do to like motivate yourself to go there? And a lot of studies also have showed that, unfortunately, the more you go into populations that are poor, the less motivated they are and the less aware they are. So we also have to keep in mind that you need to have this education around taking care of yourself, being responsible, etc., to have this not only awareness, but this motivation to do something about your health. So I just wanted to make this point because it seems important, an important step before you can like think of, okay, how can I get better? Because also linked to that, you have, if you are a government, you have to take care of like population health, and the biggest cost will be with the people that don't take care of their health at first, right? So, and you're right about the allocation. Like in a country like Belgium, where I live, around 3% of the whole healthcare budget is on prevention. 3%.
It's nothing.
3%. The rest
Nothing.
is like is really like medicines. Medicines is of course a huge one. So imagine what you could do with more prevention money to help those populations getting like more aware of like eating healthy and a good lifestyle, etc. What, by the way, and I'm really not a Trump supporter, but that's what Robert Kennedy Jr. in the United States is trying to do as healthcare, as health secretary, to try to get everyone on board with like a better health. He's worked on the food pyramid. He's working on a lot of things that can have a good impact on those populations.
Yeah. You mentioned about the preventative care, and because I think we had a conversation at some point that in traditional Chinese medicine, right, it's much more oriented about this prevention rather than right curing already an existing issue, or if you come already burned out, then that's not the right approach.
No, absolutely. And in fact, in the Chinese traditions, it was important for the physician to keep his patients healthy. So he knew the patients of his village, and his role was to keep the patients healthy. So that's why the different modalities of Chinese medicines are made to prevent diseases, so to keep you healthy. And that's why also food takes a big part is in how you take care of yourself in China. It's really like a real science behind it of how you eat, because each food will have an impact, an effect on the different organs. So once you know what kind of underlying patterns you have, meaning, for example, and I'm talking on an energetical level, if you have a weak liver, for example, of liver or liver issues, well, the physician will also prescribe you what type of foods can you take to help that specific organ, you know? And we've talked briefly about like the cold and heat patterns you might have, which is of course very simplified. But if you are someone with heat patterns, for example, we would recommend not to eat spicy food. We would recommend to eat foods with a lot of water. Think of like a cucumber, for example. We would also recommend special teas like chrysanthemum teas.
Hmm.
These are like, but the list is huge of this. So they have studied like every food has an energetical effect in your body. So this is just an example how we can like already work on the emerging patterns before they become symptoms of underlying diseases, and so before it becomes really worse and worse. But today, who is going to, again, to go to well, I guess some people to go to specialists to say like, okay,
Mm.
I feel fine, but I just want a checkup, you know? And of course, you can do like a blood test. There are other medicines or therapies that can help as well, but Chinese medicine is really a good one to detect like, okay, imbalances in the body. And then you can work on these imbalances to improve your health.
Makes so much sense, and I mean, in my opinion, that's, I guess, how it's supposed to be. But even now, there's this emerging concept called systems biology, which is relatively a new and modern concept, but it really focuses on the approach that, we shouldn't really look at an individual issue, but it's more of a body as a network, right? And it really all comes down to, and it involves many things. It involves your genetics, metabolism, your environment, your, immune responses, your behavior. So it's all a list of various things that must be taken in consideration in order to maybe determine what is the root cause that is making you feel in a particular way. And I think this large part of this fragmentation problem that in Western medicine, as opposed of what you've just said about traditional Chinese medicine, this is still not really the case. And I can speak from my own personal experience where, I mean, it's a long story, but there are a few issues. So one and a half years ago, I developed this thing called chronic pelvic pain syndrome. It's very difficult to explain in specific terms because it also what causes it and also can be 50 different factors. It can be stress, it can be muscle imbalance, it can be many different things. And well, basically what you feel is that then even sitting hurts, urinating hurts, and then you have a lot of tension, you have constipation. So it's a chronic pelvic pain issue, but it affects everything in your body. And when I went to my general practitioner in the Netherlands and to a few of the physios, all of them were suggesting to do something completely different. One guy just told me just do breathing exercises. The other ones told me just do contract and release of pelvic floor. That made me even worse. And then I really started realizing that I cannot really rely on these people, and I really have to start looking for answers deeper. And I think what we're not saying that if you have some issues, go on Google, use AI. These are all helpful additional tools that can assist you, but you should still use your critical mind, right? And still be interoceptive and see what is really happening with you. And probably a year later, I figured that there's a very strong link with my gut. So basically, my gut is making my pelvic floor feel much worse. And how does that even make sense, right? And that's the other part of the story that maybe I'll elaborate a little as we progress with the podcast. But also, as I mentioned, after a few of the times that I got COVID, it completely destroyed my microbiome, right? So microbiome is basically my whole of organisms inside my gut, and that created a lot of reactions. Like, for example, my hands and feet would get numb, and if I would go to the doctor and said after I eat my hands and feet get numb, so of course they would do physical tests to rule out. So I also had endoscopy, which is kind of you swallow a tube and they check inside your belly whether everything is okay. but they were all focusing on the actual issue. So if something is wrong with your gut or your belly, that must be the only root cause. But as the time went by, I also started noticing, and I really connected the dots, that one of the largest things, and also what COVID can do, it can really dysregulate your nervous system. And my nervous system and the way I feel, and I started noticing that even small stress can make my whole, well, all symptoms much, much worse, right? So this is another good example that only looking at one particular part of body where you experience pain or discomfort is not the right approach.
No, absolutely. And I think when you look at everything else in the world or in the universe is interconnected. When you look at nature, when you look at animals, they don't live like on their own. So everything in their environment can have an impact on them, you know? Why would it be different in our body, you know? Why would indeed your intestines or your heart be like separate things and the rest like doesn't exist? No. And that's why everything in our body is already connected physiologically by blood vessels, by tissue, by fascia, by everything. So there is no reason to think that you can like look at a problem and just focus on the organ in question. And that's why I'm so passionate about medicines like TCM that really looks at like everything that's going on, and sometimes can have can put links that are like not really obvious, but it really makes sense once you get into your system, and not only the links between like the different organs and the physiological part, but also the impact of your emotions on your organs. Because in Chinese medicine, every organ is linked to a specific emotion, and the other way around. So not only how can emotions affect your organs, but also how can a disease affect your emotion, because it goes both ways. So to give you an example, like if you take, for example, the liver is really linked to the feeling of frustration and anger. And to give you a concrete example of that, so alcoholics that really destroy their liver with alcohol, typically what can be their attitudes is aggressiveness, anger. When you see alcoholics on the street, they shout, they have this anger emotion that comes out because of the pain they inflict themselves, especially on the liver, that create those kind of emotions. So I can go on with the lungs. The lungs are linked to like grief and sadness, for example. The stomach is linked to, and the whole digestive system is linked to worrying and anxiety. When you're worried and have anxiety, you feel it in your belly, you feel it in your stomach. You're not hungry. So you already kind of know intuitively that these things happen in your body, and that there is this link with how you feel and your emotions and your what's happening in your body. When you have a day and you are very stressed or anxious, you go to the toilet and either you're constipated or you have like very loose stools or diarrhea. That can also happen. These are like the best examples you can see for yourself that, oh, wow, okay, my gut knows I was stressed, I was anxious, something happened, and you see the result of that. So these are like small proofs of that these links are there, and that you also are the best kind of observer of your own body.
Yeah. No, it's really, really interesting. And I mean, I can relate a lot, especially once you mention, anxiety and the stomach issues, is like almost you feel it indeed. And maybe from a different perspective when it comes to, well, if we really talk about body as one integrated system, right, that everything is interlinked, I find that gut and brain axis is a very interesting one. You know how gut is called as our second brain because it has over 100 million neurons in there, And gut-brain axis is basically a bidirectional communication pathway that involves your gut, your brain, your immune system, and your microbiome. And it basically has three main pathways. So first one is vagus nerve, which I'll elaborate in a bit, because for me it's also very personal, and I've noticed that I have an issue with it. The second one is immune signaling, and you also have the actual microbiome, meaning that if your gut, so for example, when it comes to your microbiome, or if your gut is disturbed, or if there's some issues, in our gut, our gut, if it's healthy, it makes dopamine, serotonin, GABA, which is a calming neurotransmitter. So technically, if you have an issue there, and because it's directly linked to your brain, you could conclude that an unhealthy gut can even be a root cause of a depression, or it can make you really feel well. Because my personal experience was, and I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, where I developed these gut issues, all of a sudden I started getting anxiety, where I would be overwhelmed. I would be thinking about 15 different tasks to do at the same time, and it was just not my nature, and I couldn't really figure it out what's really happening with me. But it really all makes sense. Or when it comes down to your immune system, right? So if you are stressed, so if your gut is also not well, you release these things called, I think they're called cytokines, which is basically like these small proteins that also cause inflammation. And lastly, vagus nerve, where I find it really, where I found after I got COVID, actually earlier this year in January, I started noticing that I started having these hot flashes, and even the vision, the way I see, everything started getting a bit pixelated or granulated,
Really?
and I really started questioning, am I going crazy? But I also started
That's
noticing after,
scary, no?
it is scary, yeah. And I would go to sleep and palpitations, and after I would eat, I would have neck pain. So vagus nerve is this, it's also called the cranial nerve, is the largest nerve we have in our body, and it connects, basically almost connects everything. So it connects your heart, your lungs, your liver, your stomach, and it has many different functions. But one of the functions is that, and in general, this nerve is a parasympathetic nerve, right? So parasympathetic nervous system is the system that is responsible for our rest and digest. So generally, when we're relaxed, when we're okay, and if the nerve is operating well, then your whole body is in harmony. If, on the other hand, you have, for example, a gut issue, that automatically dysregulates your vagus nerve, and that even means that you cannot digest food well, because vagus nerve is responsible also for making acid, so stomach acid that helps you digest the food. So again, this is another example where everything is so interlinked, and again, it's also responsible for your heart rate. So that's why sometimes irregular heartbeats or palpitations is also directly linked to, to your vagus nerve if it's dysregulated. So it's a whole sort of sequence and a feedback loop.
But how did you discover that? Did somebody tell you, or did you go to somebody to help you with that, or did you Google Google it?
So, and again, everything. I think any information that we take, any research we should, I think, take it with a grain of salt. So my main source of information, or where I really started finding ways to help myself, is Reddit. So on Reddit, there are a lot of different subreddit groups where people share common experiences. So for example, there's this group that I would look at a lot. It's called long COVID dysbiosis. So it's very, very common. People after got COVID, that their whole gut is in dysbiosis. It's chaos. Good bacteria goes down, and then the bad bacteria prevail. You get pain, and this was basically my story for the past 1.5 years. And then I also got really interested and it's almost, it's quite interesting. All of a sudden, after I got COVID, I really got this gut feeling. I really have to start meditating, and I have to spend more time into breathing exercises. And I started noticing a similar pattern. So it's a bit of a trial and error, and a lot reading on Reddit that people said, if you have gut issues, and you have this dysbiosis, you really have to also work with your nervous system. And especially when I started seeing this pixelated view and these heat waves, I started looking, and people said, yeah, that probably means that your nervous system is out of whack, and it's because of your vagus nerve. So for example, I would eat and I would get a lot of tension and pain in my neck. So again, this is because of the vagus nerve. If I would start doing, for example, 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale, which is one of the ways to calm your vagus nerve, my neck pain would disappear. And I would even feel that digestion, because I would previously my food would be sitting in my stomach and it wouldn't be digesting. So it's a bit of a trial and error, and also making use of Reddit, because when I went to my GP a couple of times and I told my symptoms, I kid you not, one time I got asked, "What is it that you want me to do?" Because I told him I did endoscopy, I did all different types of blood tests, and my biomarkers were fine. But clearly there's an issue. Like, I have pain, I have this anxiety all of a sudden, and for example, I would be in the kitchen, and my partner, she comes in the kitchen, I would get really startled. So I got really frightened by simple things, even while during meditation. If there's silence and 10 seconds later the words appear, I really get afraid. So for me, I came to a conclusion, okay, this is a much bigger problem than just my gut. There's also my nervous system that I need to work on.
So you kind of started like, okay, you have those symptoms that are kind of inexplicable. You go to your GP, he kind of, cannot help you. And then you go online, you talk about Reddit, and you check out stories and informations, and then you kind of backtest it on yourself,
Yeah.
right? You kind of, does it make sense? And then I think that's a good approach, because also you're not taking like what they say online as like, must be
Blindly.
right.
Mm-hmm.
It has to resonate with what's happening in your body, and that's why, because you talk about meditation, that's so crucial. The only moments you cannot listen to your body when you're like always on and on the go all the time. You have to work, you have, all these daily activities. You can only really listen to your body in moments of calm, where you really listen to your body, when like, okay, something is happening. Do I listen? I had so many colleagues like, and it's it's almost like a joke in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands. You have a small headache, you take a painkiller, right? You take a paracetamol.
Yeah. Paracetamol for everything.
You take a paracetamol for everything. Yeah, that's fine. But that's going to numb all the signals that your body is giving to you. Am I saying you don't take a painkiller or when you have a headache? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like, this is a signal of your body. Something is really wrong. When you have this on a chronic basis, like every other day or every week, even you have this headache or even this migraine, and you have to take a painkiller, my God, you need to do something. It's your body signaling. And it's the same with other things like inflammation. I think people have in their heads like inflammation is bad. Like inflammation is a thing that is going wrong, So what do? I need to treat the inflammation. Absolutely not. The inflammation is a natural process for your body to heal itself. It's a healing process, and you are going to try to kill it, right? So that's not the good approach. And I think we need to be much more aware of like these small everyday things that we think is like, okay, I give you another thing, and maybe I'm going to have some some critics in the comments, but
That's what we want.
for women, for example, it's not normal to have painful periods. A lot of women think like, but okay, I have painful periods, but everybody has. No, there are women who don't have painful periods, and that's how it should be. If you have painful periods, there is an underlying pattern that because some women have like, okay, it's a scale, right? But that's something that's considered also normal, and then again you take a painkiller, and then it goes over. But then you're numbing your signals. So and I think that's maybe something we can start like changing.
Yeah, no, it makes. I think even of course, I'm not a woman, but I very well know when it comes to periods, you mentioned it's so also linked to nutrition or even food that you drink.
Of
Food
course.
that you eat or beverages that you
Yeah.
drink. For example, coffee, I know could make period cramps and then pain significantly worse. So again, taking the painkiller and ignoring anything else that we do is, yeah, as you said, it's an issue. And I think it's important to distinguish, right? So as we've said, inflammation is good indeed. So also if we cut ourselves, right, inflammation helps our wounds to heal. I think the bigger issue is the chronic inflammation, right? So and that could be triggered by many different reasons. So I mean, ultra processed food, sedentary lifestyle, and chronic inflammation is one of the, I think, leading root causes. Well, as I've said in the beginning of the podcast, that according to World Health Organization, 70% of deaths are now, well, technically chronic, right? So it doesn't, and it's not something we transfer to one another. It's not an infection or a virus. And yeah, I think even like poor sleep or stress. And I think stress is definitely an interesting one where I've read this research that stress apparently can even reduce our hippocampus size. Basically, that's us living in constant stress can cause chronic inflammation, and on top of that, it can shrink our brain up 20%. Can you imagine? So that, of course, it affects everything basically.
Yeah, that's
Um,
scary. There is another one on stress that I've read very recently. Is that people during their early life that have chronically elevated cortisol levels, so chronic stress,
mhm,
they develop the first biomarkers of like Alzheimer's and other types of like dementias,
mm,
etc., at an early age. So you can really they have proven that there is like a direct link to like elevated stress levels, chronic stress levels,
mm.
and early onset of dementia and Alzheimer's.
That's crazy. Actually, on that one, I also, as I was reading really and spent quite a lot of time researching, also got that if you have a dysbiosis in your gut, if you, for example, lack good bacteria, now it's been proven that it's one of the root causes that also get you to Parkinson's. So it already starts sort of building up slowly 10 to 15 years before you actually start seeing Parkinson's disease. So I think what we're both heading is that a lot of issues might not be visible to you at this given moment in your life, right? When it comes to very serious illnesses or diseases. But a lot of there are a lot of things that impact it, and it's mostly your lifestyle, right? And I think also getting back, maybe just a step back, when we were talking how I was looking into Reddit and trying to do a bit of a trial and error. It's also important for listeners to understand that every human is very individual and dependent. So one thing that works for one person is not going to work, because also genetically we're different. Also, well, I mean, there's so much individuality about us. So it doesn't mean that even the same medicine or the same approach is going to work for everybody. That's why it is so important to take responsibility for your own health and, really try what works for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you touched upon like, okay, how do I start? So for people who are listening or viewing us today, it's like, okay, maybe it's a wake up call. It's like, okay, I have these health issues, and I think everybody has like something that's happening or that they want to improve. What do you think is the first step you can take to kind of improve, or at least have kind of self-diagnosis of what's going on?
So I think there are a few things. So first of all, when it comes to self-diagnosis, and we briefly touched on meditation, and I think I'm not gonna say, I think meditating in general is training your brain, same as a lot of people nowadays train their muscles and go to the gym. But I think what I talk from my personal experience, what really helped me is with this being more introspective. What does that mean? It means that during the meditation, you really get back to this sort of, status quo um, uh, feeling of yourself. So, and you really, I mean, there are different types of meditations, but when I talk about introspective, you really get aware of your body. So everything that is happening, because And if you do, then you start noticing even the twitches or the pain or discomfort that you normally in your conscious mind wouldn't. So I think that really helped me. If I really tune into my body and I'm not distracted about anything else, I'm just, putting focus on myself. I started noticing, for example, some of the pain I have in my back that I wasn't really aware of, and I noticed that it even affects my breathing patterns, because tight neck, for example, or tight back can prevent you expanding your diaphragm properly. So it's maybe it's not the best example, but uh, and it's also probably very individual. How do you really start noticing these things?
It's like when you get this kind of this awareness about the feelings or the symptoms you have. Is this something you journal? Is this something you is there a structured way to
Hmm.
do this, or did you just have it in your somewhere in the back of your mind?
It's more of a, yeah. So actually, I did started journaling, and I also made use of AI, but AI not necessarily to ask directly for an advice, but just putting all of my everything that is on my mind in that system, and then of course it can give you good recommendations. But again, when it comes to any sort of feedback,
It
you should
lacks.
take it with a grain of
Yeah, yeah,
salt,
yeah.
right? But also, yeah, I mean, when it comes to tracking, there are other, for example, I have this bracelet. It's called Whoop. And it helps you track some of the markers, like, for example, called heart rate variability. It's a very important metric that can determine how well, and it's also very individual per person. So it doesn't mean that if you look one result is, it doesn't mean it's good or bad, right? But generally, it measures the gaps between your heartbeats in a way, right? So, and the higher heart rate variability, the better you recover, the better your nervous system, or the better regulated your nervous system is. So when I got this watch, and it also measures, for example, your resting heart rate. So these are some tangible evidence you can look at. And previously, my heart rate variability was around 60, for example. So that suggested that for my age and for my fitness activity, because I exercise quite frequently, it was on the low end. And that was also one of the suggestive patterns that maybe there's my nervous system that is involved. As soon as I started doing breathing exercises, as soon as I started meditating, I calmed down, it went to 100. So now as I sleep, it almost doubled. And it's not because I improved my cardiovascular fitness or in general my fitness that much, but that was for me, basically a hint that maybe I should look, yeah.
No, interesting. For me, the way I would approach it, if well, that's kind of also how I did it. But for sure, the first step is like, I think, looking at your family history.
Hmm.
Looking at, okay, you have some families where there are a lot of cancer issues, people having cancer. So we know that genetically there might be a predisposition for you already.
Hmm.
So this is already something to keep in mind. If there is a history of cardiovascular disease, your parents, for example, or even beyond that, uncles, aunts, really look at it broadly, and kind of, if you see already a pattern, already something like this appearing, that should be on top of your on top of your mind already. The other thing is, besides that, of going a bit deeper than that, is looking at, um, do I have more the kind of the pattern of my mother or my father, in terms of how my body works, maybe how my digestion works. If you have a mother who had, I don't know, a lifelong sleeping issue, for example, you see that pattern emerging also. It's interesting because you already have the experience of your mother, that you can check and see, okay, how can I already prevent this of happening, or start early? Because of course, the later you go into your life, the more difficult it's going to be to change the pattern you're kind of born with. So this is the part of like more the genetic epigenetic gene expression that you have and that you don't choose. This is something you're born with. And then, of course, the other step, and then you talk about lifestyle, is how you live your life in general. That means how you eat, and then linked to eating and the food you ingest is like, okay, I eat this food. How am I feeling after I eat this food? And then you start building up your kind of individual lists of foods that are good for you and the other ones that are bad for you. And you have to respect this at all times. This is your body telling this food is really not good for me. The same, of course, we talked about coffee or other beverages. It's like you have to detect for yourself the effect it has on your body, and then try eliminate one food, and then see how you feel. And so this is trial and error. But at the end, and this is something I think it's important to write down because you forget.
Yeah,
Because we
absolutely.
have such a diverse, diverse like food intake. You really need to write that down, and then at some point you will have your kind of individualized menu, let's say, that you have to follow. Also, sleep. We talk about sleep. Sleep is like super important, and especially sleep says a lot about your mental state.
Mm.
So I think that's like the best parameter. Not only, okay, do I fall asleep easily? Do I wake up at night? At what time do I wake up at night? But also, if I sleep, do I have dreams? Do I have nightmares? And how do I feel when I wake up? Because I can have a whole night's sleep, but then wake up tired for some reason. Then these are like starting points of like, okay. And then you have your sleep, you have your food intake, you have your mood. Because you talk about the chronic diseases, a lot of chronic illnesses are also mental illnesses, like depression and other mental diseases. This is something also you need to kind of monitor. And maybe it's a good time also now to talk about, okay, but how do I know, like, how do I know how I feel? How do I know? So you need to have a kind of a baseline.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your baseline is like, for me at least, the way I see it is like, when was the last time I was at my my peak is maybe a big word, but like my optimal state in my life, or maybe in this year, or have a baseline, and then you can see like, okay, oh no, I'm doing better, or I'm doing worse. That's also a good starting point, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think few things to add. So, I mean, when you mentioned actually the depression is also an interesting one, right? Because it starts in your body way before the actual symptoms appear. So it's similarly, I mean, it's not only a neurotransmitter issue, but it's also, I mean, it's caused by this inflammation, and then prolonged stress can be, can well, I wouldn't say give you depression, but could be one of the leading causes. I think when it comes to tracking, everything you've said makes absolute sense, and especially when it comes to food, I can say that after COVID, I also developed this histamine reaction to foods, meaning that a lot of foods give me allergic reactions, runny nose, I cough, I get extreme brain fog. I think I mentioned like one of the times we were doing podcasts, I really couldn't make a sentence. I was really struggling. So I really had to start tracking. And I think when it comes to tracking, what people realize, and it also comes down to supplements. People buy 10 supplements and they start taking all at once, and then you don't really know what's making you feel in what particular way. So I think what's very important, and I'm not an advocate for a carnivore diet, but this is a good example where people, for example, with some autoimmune diseases, they would really move to carnivore, meaning that you only eat basically, you eliminate carbohydrates from your diet. It's pretty much only animal-based products and fats, right? And then your body goes into ketosis, starts making use of fat as an energy source instead of carbs, right? And then slowly people would start reintroducing one product after one product. So when it comes to vegetables, maybe this couple of days only avocado, then cucumber, and then you really see how your body feels. And that's how I myself, a year ago, I did carnivore diet for 1.5 months. I noticed, and for example, bell pepper was a vegetable I would almost use every single day. I would cook, I would be bloated, I wouldn't know. So I realized I really don't tolerate bell pepper. It bloats me, it doesn't make me feel good. Similarly to nightshades, that for example, to my partner, she noticed, well, we came to a conclusion that probably tomatoes and eggplants give skin issues. And you wouldn't really know, I mean, if you have this broad diet and then you're eating and you're not sure how you're feeling. So perhaps, and again, it's not because also of your health composition and maybe issues doesn't mean that you can maybe move full on to carnivore, because maybe, I don't know, your belly cannot really process fat as much. But this is a good example where you really have to do one by one. Same goes with supplements. Uh, Start with one supplement, track for a week. How is it making you feel? Or do you see an improvement or not? And then do another one. But if you are gonna do a combination of things all at once, you're not gonna be able to self-assess yourself properly.
Also on the supplements, you mentioned also like doing a blood test, because there are two reasons why you would take a supplement. It's like, okay, either you have like a deficiency, but then you need to have some proof of this deficiency. So you have to have a blood test, and also a blood test is just like one image at one point of time. So ideally you would have like several blood tests, and ideally you would have like these broad spectrum blood tests with also the biomarkers. And there are a lot of labs now. You can even like order it online, I think, today. But knowing like, okay, do I have a deficiency? Because taking just something because you have read, oh, it's good for this, for that. Yeah, but maybe it's not good for you. And then the other thing, of course, if you want to optimize your health, that's another part. So there are like very recent studies on vitamin D showing that you can really take high doses of vitamin D. It doesn't matter. The effects are really very beneficial on a lot of parameters. And even if there is like sun, even in the summer, it's beneficial to take vitamin D. So there we're not really talking about per se a deficiency, but more a way to optimize your health. But you're right. It's like, don't take them like these multivitamins, for example. That's a good example, because you think, oh, they said it like, oh, it's like, everything is in it, so
and it's easy.
It's easy, yeah, and
it's
it
like same
tastes
with like
good, and it tastes good.
painkillers, it's and I think that's the issue, that we got so comfortable. We always try to seek for these easy solutions, right? We don't really want to put in the work, as you've said, headache, paracetamol. I want to get healthy, multivitamin. But I think considering how much time we spend as a society on things that are not important and irrelevant, right? Because I mean, to be honest, I've noticed myself very well. Once your health goes down the hill, nothing else really matters. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to have fun. You don't want to, you don't perform. You don't feel like, yeah. So I think, and actually, as you brought up vitamin D, I think it also comes down to how do we actually read information and research. Because there's so much nowadays. Coffee is good, coffee is bad. Eggs are good, eggs are bad. And you can find article about pretty much everything. One saying positive, the other one contradicting it. So I think it's also very important for listeners to understand that, well, reading the information or research also comes down with, a bit of skepticism, perhaps. We also have to understand a lot of this research is incentivized. It's paid for. So if, for example, we see also, I don't know, a biopharmaceutical company saying that something is bad, we really have to use our critical thinking. Okay, they're saying it's bad, but is there any gain for them out of this study, right? So I don't know, how do yourself, for example, if you want to research a new supplement, right? And I think you were mentioning previously you were looking to take a new supplement. What are the criteria you would look at?
So I have an experience working for pharma companies for quite some years.
Okay.
So of course I have like maybe a more nuanced vision. But the way I do research, and I think for that AI is amazing, because the problem with scientific research for like the broader population is that, of course, you have this kind of barrier of scientific studies have their own vocabulary, they have their own like the methodologies, etc. If you are new to this, Where do you find this research? Yeah, you find this research on like specific portals like PubMed, Science Direct, or whatever. These publishers, these research publishers, and it's very difficult to get what you want and to understand, also to interpret the results. So what I do with AI is that on any topic you want to research, the first thing you can ask AI is like, oh, is there some recent data on this or this? But then that's not enough. You have to add in what your AI will give you. Can you filter out, the unbiased, independent research? And then he will do that. He will say like, oh, okay. And then he will look at the funding, and he will look at, okay, what are really the independent researchers in there? And then you can ask, okay, what's important when you look at a scientific study? And that's a discussion we can both have. Is like, the first thing I look for in a scientific study is it recent? If it's a study from 1971, maybe that's not relevant. The second thing I will look for is like the population. Is it on 100 people? Well, if it's on 100 people, come on, that's too small of a sample. Is it like a proper sample, like thousands, 10,000s of persons? Okay, that's already more robust. And then the best researchers for me are meta-analysis. What's a meta-analysis? A meta-analysis is like a study that looks at all the studies in a certain domains, and then they put all those results and those parameters together, and then they come to a conclusion. So they kind of conclude out of all the other studies what kind of the main result is. So that's very reliable.
Yeah, that's a good point. On meta, especially, I also, as I was doing research on some food, especially because food is so controversial, and I think there's just no consensus of what is good or what is bad. And also, I guess it really depends from what kind of angle you look at it. But yeah, it makes sense. And I noticed myself a couple of years ago, I would just read this article, research, and these would be just, what is it, like almost critic opinions, So it's like, well, like it doesn't have any value. Well, it has value, but it's not really, independent. It's still biased. I think the other one that I was also looking, it's called, I think it's called coherent. No, not coherent. Sorry. It's basically an observational study, right? Where you have for example, a sample of 1,000 or 1,100 people, and they do something. Either it's it's a drug, either it's a food, or they change their environment or some sort of habit. And then I think these I also find quite interesting, right? Because they're based directly on humans, and then they observe what actually happens to them.
In every study also you have like a portion where it says limitations.
Yeah,
it's important to read that portion of limitations. Also because we are all individuals, and especially in like observational studies, when they observe like also populations from different countries, there are so many parameters that can be taken into account and are maybe not taken into account. Often you will find that in limitations. So that's an important portion of the study to read.
Yeah, true. Another interesting thing I think is that, well, over 70% of for example, drug trial studies, right? So if we're looking into, I don't know, trying out new supplement, right? And we would have, they're all industry funded, right? So there is a big business behind it. And again, as I've said previously, I don't want to sound cynical, but we have to be critical about it, because also another thing to understand, I think, when it comes to studies, there is this biasness involved. And more often than not, you're still going to have studies suggesting that something is good for you, rather than a study coming out as like, please don't do this. Because even if they're going to suggest that maybe this particular supplement, food, or whatever is not good for you, and they don't offer an alternative, then it makes sense. But otherwise, what is the business side of things? So I think, especially when it comes to, because there's so many new supplements coming out, and we so easy, and I find myself sometimes being a little bit impatient, wanting to solve the issue right away. And it's like, oh, this sounds like a miracle drug, but yeah.
The difficulty is of course like you have to follow the money.
Yeah.
And the money sits in the pharma to sponsor those studies. And the problem is, of course, to find funds to study other things that might be as efficient, if not more efficient, but natural, for example, or supplementation is also one that's important. But of course, if there is no money at the end of it, it's going to be difficult to invest in that. But so coming back to kind of like, okay, how do we start like looking at our symptoms, and how do we? So looking at the literature is an important one. Don't get lost in the literature, because once you get online, there is like so much. That's why AI is a good thing to like kind of summarize and
Yeah.
have a kind of more focused approach instead of like going wild searching online. You talked about Reddit. That's also a good one. One other thing I would do in general and on daily basis, to be honest, is like I would look at two things. It's like my poop and my pee, my urine. So it's not only how often I poop, but it's also what does
What
it
is
look
it? Yeah,
like?
exactly.
Look at it. People don't want to look at it. And that's why I love the Netherlands so much also,
Just because of
because
the toilet.
yes, but for people who don't know, it's like in the Netherlands they have this toilets where your poop your poop doesn't go directly into the drain, into the water. It's like it lies
Yeah.
down there somewhere, not everywhere, but in a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
places you still have those
Exactly.
toilets. So you cannot do anything else than look at it before you flush. Of course, you can decide to flush with and closing your eyes, but so that's why is it important? Because it gives the best indication of what is happening in your body. Because this is something that it starts with the food you ingest, and then it goes down the way until the end. So it gives you a good idea of your digestion, of course, but it goes further than that. So when I got like patients coming in, I always ask the question like, okay, what does your poop look like? And I swear to you, 80% of patients, they say normal.
No idea.
Normal or no
Yeah.
idea. Normal. And then they laugh. They say, like, what do you mean normal? And then you have to enter into the details. So
Yeah.
what does a good poop look like? It's like, it's not loose, so it's firm. Firmness is important. It's firm. It's well formed, meaning no small pieces. No, it's well formed in one piece, and it goes out easily, and it doesn't smell. The smell is not that foul. So these are already a bit simplified, but indications of like, oh, my poop is good. Okay. Once you have, of course, on a regular basis, because it depends on the meal. So we talk about on a regular basis. If on a regular basis you have loose stools, so stools that you poop and it goes out like very easily, and it's not really formed, and it's like very loose, that's not a good indication. And the other way around, if you are like more constipated and your poop is like your stools are dry and small pieces, or you can go a day without pooping, for example, these are also indications that something is not right. So that's for me my very important indication. Like every day I look at that, and then I look at my urine also. If my urine is too dark, that's also not good, again on a regular basis. And if it's too clear, that's also not good. That means also your kidneys are overworked, maybe you drink too much water, etc., etc. So that's kind of my go-to on a daily basis to check on my health.
It's definitely very important. Yeah, and I think a few others to add. I think your skin scent, and I notice myself. Of course, depending on our diet, our skin smells different. But if your sweat, for example, starts smelling very different than it was smelling before,
Yes.
or you notice, I mean, sometimes you can notice how your breath smells as well, especially if you
Yes.
wake up and you notice, oh, it's very different. It also can indicate, a particular change in your body that is not necessarily good.
Absolutely.
Um, but
And not only also, sorry, so only because you have to look at small things. because it's the devil is in the details. You have to look at the small things. You talk about breath, and even like in the type of smells, in the type of odors. In Chinese medicine, we really distinguish also like the type of odors, the how your sweat smells, for example. That's also an important indication. But then also look at your nails. If your nails are brittle, that's also an issue. Look at your hair. If your hair is like, if you're shedding hair, or if you have a dry scalp, these are all indications that something is imbalanced.
Well, that's interesting about scalp. Yeah. I think it all comes down to. I mean, we've discussed. I think so many. I think we made a point, right? That it's very important to take back responsibility for our own health, and I think it all then comes down to personalization. I think all of these things that we've said, and I think we mentioned briefly previously, that we are all very unique and individual human beings, right? So even if you read a research that, I don't know, like turmeric or ginger works as an inflammatory, and yes, for the most part it does, but you eat it and you don't feel well, and that was my experience a bit with ginger. I would get cramps. Then yeah, it doesn't mean that, don't force it, don't push it, because we're all biologically different. And it also comes down to balance. That, well, exercise in general is beneficial, but over exercising is, inflammatory. Or same as fasting, for example. Well, fasting generally is good, but it also depends on underlying conditions you have. And not eating for too long also, causes cortisol spikes in your body, right? I think it does, right? If you don't eat for too long, you're
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
So I think it all comes to finding this balance, and to really trying to create a personalized health plan for yourself. So you gather research, be critical, do a bit of trial and error. But most important thing is, and even an interesting one I read about genes, that, and it's called epigenetics theory, that generally our genes, they're not fixed. So based on the environment, based on what we do, they change, right? So it also means that if even you get, and that's sort of my take from everything, for example, this chronic pelvic pain, people also take chronic conditions as of it's for life. Or people get issues after COVID, and they assume that they're going to have histamine reactions or pain or whatever for life. No, nothing is for life. And I think maybe one part that we haven't discussed that maybe we can briefly touch upon, and it's a bit nuanced, but it's our mind, right? So if we believe that we are sick, if we identify as, a sick human, and we're not going to get better, and we almost convince our mind and our nervous system that this is our new reality, I don't think we're gonna get better. So I think it's also very, and it's not that much woo-woo. I mean, there's also evidence and research, right, that the way we feel about ourselves, right, is, well, from more spiritual point of view, you could say that, yeah, our thoughts and feelings create or shape our reality. But I mean, more from grounded side of things, and I'm not sure what your stance or take on it is, that, well, our mind also very much influence our healing and how we feel about ourselves.
Yeah, that's something now that research is proving more and more, that you see physical changes once your mind is changing as well. So the way you speak to yourself, like you mentioned, is super important, because this will not only change your brain, but it will change also the reality of your body. So mindset is like super important. And you always see also these stories of like people having like cancer, of like really severe diseases, who stay in this mindset that's like, okay, the disease is not happening to me. It's like, no, it's something that is a kind of something that I need to not nurture, but almost like, yeah, this acceptance. and say like, okay, I'm going to get out of this, and my body is strong enough, and but coming back to like even the other way around, it's like how how you talk to yourself is also, because if
Mm.
we talk about depression or like the more mental diseases, they're also stemming from that, from self-doubt, from like, all these negative feelings you might have, and these like these negative self-image you have of yourself and things like that. Of course, it can have like a lasting impact, and it can create those imbalances in your body, and at the end also lead to disease.
Yeah, I agree. Look, it's quite simple, right? I mean, there's a lot of research and evidence, and it makes sense that if our thoughts and mind, right, it can create, for example, stress. If our thoughts and mind can make us sick, which is 100% right, right,
Yeah.
because of the whole feedback loop that we've been kind of discussing, the other way around, our mind and our thoughts can definitely heal us and make us feel better. And it's definitely not, part of the woo-woo land. And I was actually listening to this podcast with this neuro, I don't remember, well, it doesn't matter the title, but basically she was saying some people in the US, and or some of her patients, they even put on a license plate the disease that they have, like for example type 2 diabetes, so people start identifying themselves
Yes.
as an issue or the disease that they have. And
Yes.
like, how do you imagine that even whatever physical things that you're gonna do, it's either gonna take you much longer to get better, or it's just not gonna help, because your brain then believes that this is what you are. So I think it's very important to not only control your physical environment or physical things that you do, but also to really take a second, sometimes stop for a moment, and really think, okay, how do I feel about this, and really change your stance about some things, because it's crucial.
One thing, it's like one thing that can motivate you to get better is like when you adapt something, might be your lifestyle, might be a supplement, might be anything, and then you see an effect, a positive effect on your health. I think that's the best
Mm.
motivator, because you've done the research. So you've first of all, you've identified, okay, something is wrong. You've done the research, you've implemented what you learned, and then you see that there is this positive effect.
Mm.
And indeed, you have done something to better your health. I don't know if there is like a better feeling than like, oh, I don't have this symptom anymore. Or,
Yeah.
oh, my sleep is getting better just because I did this and this by myself. And of
Yeah.
course, it takes time to do those changes. But I think it's the best motivation, because after that, it's like, oh, you realize I can have an impact on my own health.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I think maybe one of the last things that I wanted to briefly touch upon is sort of this shared biological ground, or basically, well, things that are known and they kind of make sense, and maybe for most people it's gonna be, they've already heard of it, but things that really, well, either prevent us of getting better, or in general make us sick, right? So I think one interesting one that I started noticing myself is the circadian rhythm, right? That in general, us as humans, we're kind of, so if some, and of course, some people are early risers, some perform better, at night, yes. But if you're one of those persons that says, oh yeah, I go to bed 6 a.m. just because I work during the night, it might be true, but what you're probably not realizing, that this type of lifestyle can disrupt, well, a lot of things. It can also disrupt your cognitive performance. It can create inflammation, because we're still, as you've sort of mentioned, I think in the beginning of the podcast, right, that everything is interlinked. So as in nature, same as in body, right? And I mean, we are very much linked and correlated with nature. I think another one is what, ultra processed foods, right? I mean, there's so much research nowadays that ultra processed foods, it just,
Sugar,
yeah, sugar. But again, it all comes down to what kind of sugar, because fructose, right? It's
yeah,
it's
of
it's
course. But I give you an example. If you struggle with being overweight,
mm,
the first thing you do is you cut out sugar, and that means also carbs.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. An interesting one though, and again, a fair share of my personal experience. I went to this physical trainer, and he ran the whole body tests, basically to see how much muscle mass I have in which part of the body, and he said, unproportionately, you have because I have now relatively low body fat percentage, but it said you unproportionately have um, a lot of fat on your waist or your belly. And he said it doesn't make sense. And he said it's not nutrition, it's not calories, because he said it's stress. So also, actually, when you mentioned weight, I just remembered it's an interesting one, that visceral fat can definitely be built because of stress. So but yeah, no, sorry, I went a bit off topic, of course, but sugar, I for sure agree. And I mean, sugar overall, right? It can lead you to to insulin resistance and later diabetes, which is not
Also raises your cortisol levels, etc. So it's not a good thing. I think what I want to say is also like before going to supplements or before going to more complex modalities, take care of the basics. Like you need 8 hours of sleep. You need like to have a routine in terms of sleep. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time.
No.
You need to go out to get some sunshine. You need to eat proper food. You have to move your body. These things, everybody knows. You cannot say, I don't know. So get already your basics in order. That's the first thing. And then see what else you can do. But that, I think, is also like the first step everyone can take. And it's like, I think, low cost.
Yeah, no, indeed. And of course, it depends on what part of the world you live. But as you've said, all of these things they don't really cost you. And of course, because of your work, you might not be getting enough sleep. But there also, I think, if we really go to extremes, I think there are also some alternatives, right? I think maybe you probably will know much more than I do, but it's been proven that, well, for example, if you have two jobs, you really struggle to get 8 hours of sleep, something like Nidra yoga, I think, has been proven. There's research that it can really, because when you don't sleep, what happens? I mean, your cortisol and your stress goes up. So, for example, Nidra yoga is, I mean, all I'm saying is that there are alternatives, even if you cannot follow the base plan, as you've said.
Yes.
There are still ways where you can somehow, balance or offset the damage at least a little bit.
Take some creatine. Creatine has also shown to compensate lack of sleep. And it's like one of the most studied supplements ever, creatine. True. So that's a good one. But what I mean is that, of course, you need to do what you can. Is like when you're just becoming like a parent and your kid is you have to wake up for your kid 2 or 3 times a night. Of course, you can do things to compensate, but it's like you have the responsibility to at least change what you can change in your environment, right? Yeah. So what you can control, at least try to control it.
Yeah. So I think, look, to sort of conclude, I think we all have to be the observers of our own body. I mean, it's our own responsibility that's been, I think, kind of forgotten, and I think it also comes down to so many distractions in our lives that we put focus on things that don't matter, as I've said, and they're not important, until the point where, of course, if you face some sort of a physical, psychological issue, then you really start questioning. But it also can be, well, I'm not going to say too late, but then it just gets much more difficult, right? So taking that responsibility back, and again, as we said, we're not against medical doctors, we're not against the system. Is just the system is not really well made for most of the illnesses that we have. So it can assist you, but it also is not going to blindly, just because of some blood tests, tell you what kind of issue you have. And I think it also, again, it's very personal, independent, and individual. But as you've said, it feels good when you make a change that you sort of observed and you came to a conclusion or interpretation yourself, and you see an improvement in your body. It feels good. You feel like you are in control, and then whatever happens because also the way our brain works, uncertainty causes stress, right? So brain doesn't really like changes, and whatever is sort of familiar or recognized makes us feel much better. So if you are going to be able to make an improvement once, going forward, you're going to feel much better of any other obstacles that come your way, because you can do it yourself. You don't have to rely on others.
Yeah,
so
and a
much.
good thing, because we talked about, like, to conclude on my side, all the small symptoms you see, like hair shedding or your nails getting brittle, you're not sleeping right, or those smaller things. These are things you can go with to a Chinese medicine practitioner and talk about it. Talk about them. Because if you say, like, to a GP, I'm shedding my hair,
Yeah.
he'll probably give you a supplement,
Yeah.
a vitamin supplement, and,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Sure.
So there are ways to also, for yourself, look at those small things and seek for help.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe just as you mentioned, I also go to acupuncture myself, and like I really noticed last time I went, he would check my pulse on,
Pulses, yeah.
and even though I primarily went for my gut, and the physician said, "Oh, your liver is weak," and then he would put the needles, and then because also liver is so much, of course, correlated with
It's
your
part of the digestion system
exactly.
also, right?
So,
Yeah.
and that's not what probably a traditional doctor would be able to
No.
find or recognize. But anyways, I think I really
Yeah.
enjoyed actually this
We
talk.
can go on and on,
Yeah, exactly.
forever, but let's stop there.
Yeah, let's stop there.
Thanks for the conversation. It was super interesting.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That was interesting. Is there anything else you want to add?
We're good.
No,
yes.
we're good. We just because we have we'll just take a small break,
small
and then we
break.
have a second one, which probably
Yeah,
also will take
knows.
less, because this one was almost 1.5 hours, right?
No.
It was 1 hour and give or take 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah,
because
something
I
like
made a
that.
mistake in the first part.
Ah, okay,
Yeah.
okay, but it's
No,
good.
we're fine. We're fine.
What do you think?
It's okay. It was not that easy. I would, in my mind,